your proactive attention, that 2 to 3 hours in the day where you're going to be most alert, most able to do great work, statistically tends to be in the morning, but not everybody. So you might be someone who's an afternoon, evening person. Then you have, after those 2 to 3 hours of your best proactive, brilliant attention, you have a sort of bit in the middle. And then you have some hours in your day where you have what I call inactive attention. And for that, I have a list on my Todoist app. I have a list called mindless, which is basically I'm half asleep. I've got really nothing left in the tank, but I can just kill these 5 or 6 things, and it's stuff like doing research online, or like buying stuff, or like just those simple things, or just getting back to scheduling emails or whatever, like just stuff that's quite simple and easy to do. So on the one hand, be really strict with those 2 to 3 hours of proactive attention and make sure you're defending those, really utilizing them well, not being lazy in that time, like doing really great work in that time, like push yourself in those 2 to 3 hours, be the sergeant major of your own brain. And then on the other hand, when it's those hours where you don't have great energy, great attention, give yourself the gift of a mindless list where you can just be like, this is all I need to do now. Like, I've done my great work. This is just the other sort of admin, maintenance, whatever else it is, that I'm fine to only be doing this, and that's okay. And so at that point, you want to be your own counselor or be much softer and kinder to yourself. So just kind of recognizing those dynamics and sort of segmenting the day in that kind of way, segmenting your to-do list in that way, I just think is, it's such a game changer for so many people.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the LifeHack Show, a series of interviews with exciting people who've built successful businesses and careers by taking action and getting more out of each day. Something we firmly believe in here at LifeHack. My name is Carl Pauline, and I'm your host for this show. Today's guest is Graham Allcott. Graham is the author of 4 books, including the global bestseller Productivity Ninja, and he's also the founder of the company Think Productive, one of the world's leading personal productivity and consulting companies. Graham's mission is to revolutionize the traditionally stuffy time management courses we all see too often in the corporate world today. Graham is also the host of the popular business podcast, Beyond Busy. Thank you, Graham, for joining us today. Now, before we get started, when did you first become interested in productivity?
Yeah, so my journey into doing what I do was me fixing me. So I got into leadership roles at quite a young age. I was running a charity at 26. Small national charity with about 15 staff. And so I had this amazing team of people that I'd have ideas sat at my desk and people would be on the case and stuff would be happening. And then I went freelance, and I remember one day just sitting at my desk and having ideas and looking around and realizing that I was no longer in an office with a team, and I was in the spare bedroom of my flat in London, and there was nobody. And so it was like, oh, I've missed out this whole bit in the middle that you learn as you go through your career, which is that sort of completer finisher, getting things over the line, like really, that sort of sense of execution of work. I'd missed it out because I'd got into leadership like too young, really. So I then just kind of went on this whole journey of reading every book and every blog and everything that I could come across around productivity, and just seeing what worked for me, seeing what didn't work. And then I was back working with some people that had previously worked for me. And one of them said, hey, why do you answer your emails so well now? And you never used to reply before when I worked for you. And, how come you're turning up to meetings with all these like nice folders with labels on, and like, what's happened? And so I just fell into talking to these people about my own journey with productivity. And I sort of rather sheepishly thought I was the last person in the world who had learned this stuff. And I felt like everybody else was doing this and I was somehow deficit. And then every time I talked to someone about getting their inbox to zero or getting everything out of their head or whatever it was, like, people just had this huge reaction to it. And it very quickly just overtook everything else that I was doing as a freelancer and became my business, Think Productive. So that was, we set that business up in 2009. And since then we've worked with, just some of the most incredible organizations in the world. Like if you look at our kind of logo page on the website, it kind of blows my mind. It's Disney and eBay and Google and all these huge companies. right through to charities and governments and royal families and all sorts of people. So yeah, that's been really the journey from 2009, is fixing me first, and then figuring out, hey, I've got something here that I can relate to people with, because I recognize the struggle. Like, I'm not naturally an organized person. I'm not naturally someone who is good at putting those things together. So when I created systems that worked for me, it's like, well, if they work for me, they work for anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, similar text. I remember David Allen talking about his journey, if you like, to writing the book, Getting Things Done. And that was 20 years in the making. But again, it was very much started off in him fixing himself first. And then he was actually a consultant. So he was doing, I guess, business consulting. But then he discovered that a lot of his clients actually needed the same principles because they were struggling. And that was back in the 80s and 90s. So
I heard David Allen say once that he had, what did he say? He had 30 jobs before he was 30 or something. He just used to try all these different jobs. That's the bit I knew about his backstory.
He's done a lot of jobs as well, and it's so he's obviously had a lot of experience in different fields, which actually I think in many ways that might have helped you as well, because going out on your own, you're not just seeing a tiny part of a specific type of work. You get to see everything. Because I run my own business as well, and I'm the HR people, I'm the marketing manager, I'm the the CEO, I'm everything, and you have to learn very quickly that there's different types of work that need to be done. So I need a system.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that was quite influential for me early on was, so I worked in this national charity that was quite small and had no money. Like every 6 months there would be a sort of funding crisis that was quite existential. Like, are we even going to survive this? And it was really hard to fundraise for. But it was like, at the same time, the work we were doing was lobbying government. So what I saw firsthand was how power works on the one hand. And then on my level, I saw how I learned how to be really creative with no money. And so I feel like that really stood me in good stead for setting up my own business and talking to people about productivity, because I think it's really easy to get stuff done when you can chuck loads of money at it. And it's really easy to get innovation when you have millions of pounds of R&D budget, but actually doing it with nothing and living on a shoestring and having to really, sort of fight for your survival as an organization, it does teach you a lot about sort of prioritizing what's important and really making space for stuff that matters,
Yeah, it does. You're right. Yeah. So going on that line of like working with other people, where do you think people are having real difficulties today? Where's the biggest problem in productivity today? Because I've been reading newspapers over the Christmas break and talking about how in the UK and in the US productivity is in a slump. And I know they're talking about not necessarily industrial productivity, but business productivity as opposed to personal productivity. But it's a little bit like, you've got to fix the personal productivity for the actual business productivity to get working. Because if you go from the top down, it's not going to work because nobody's motivated to work it. So where do you think the biggest problem is today in terms of, well, both personal and maybe I think personal productivity is probably where the bigger issues are.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I can say about that is, so I wrote How to Be a Productivity Ninja, which is my biggest selling book. And is really the kind of handbook for how I do productivity, is basically what's in How to Be a Productivity Ninja. And that was published in 2014. And then my publisher said in 2019, they wanted to do a 5-year anniversary edition of it. Right. So they said to me, here's the book, strip it back down to the bare bones. It's like, what's changed in the last 5 years? And this was back in 2019. But what I noticed then is probably the same as what I'd say in 2023, which is, it feels like the biggest thing that changed between 2014 and 2019, and it's been the same from 2019 to now, is the way people think about and use their phones and how that becomes a huge distraction point. So I actually wrote a whole new chapter in the 2019 edition, which is the green cover one, if you want to go and look it up. The chapter was called How to Stop Messing About on Your Phone. And it's basically, we derail ourselves in terms of, interruptions and wanting to seek out those dopamine hits and so on. And how we self-manage around that stuff and how we deal with willpower is, I think, really, really important. And I think the reason that's become even more so between 2019 and now is work from home, right? And hybrid. And what was interesting in the COVID period was Think Productive, my business, our main focus is on going into organizations, doing workshops, doing coaching with people at their desks. And of course, in March 2020, like all of that just got derailed. So, most of our clients didn't cancel, they just postponed. But we just had this hole of months and months. And again, that was probably the first time in a long time that I'd been in that state of organizational existential crisis. But what we realized pretty quickly was, hang on, we're a bunch of people who've worked hybrid and worked from home for years, and we teach productivity. So we've really got something that we can offer here that really helps. So rather than go into kind of defensive mode, we went offense, and we were like, right, free webinars every day. And we just started doing live free webinars at the very start of COVID. And organizationally, that saved our bacon, because we had loads of inquiries coming in. And I remember one email opening up that was like, we would like to book sessions for our team on this date, this date, this date, this. I mean, I was just like, oh, I think this is going to be okay. So that was quite a moment of survival. But I think that was also something where, coming back to the phones thing and interruptions, that's a whole new way of working. And I think we're definitely over the point where most people have calibrated how to do that, and and are much more into that being the norm. But I do think, how we manage ourselves, how we think about willpower, how we think about our phones, like our own motivation becomes much more central. And I suppose to sort of summarize that for how I do that, I'm a big fan of a psychologist called Roy Baumeister, who talks about this concept of strength control. And basically, he says, if you start to try and manage yourself with your own willpower is a depleting resource. So you're really on a hiding to nothing if you want to try and manage your own motivation, your own sense of distraction with your own willpower. So you really have to make the starting point. How do I treat myself like a kid? How do I just give myself and surround myself with the things that I need, and put out of my attention the things that I don't need? And then, from there, you can really start to have the right things in front of you at the right time to make great work.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've come across, particularly with my clients, and a lot of them say this, is that I have to answer my phone when my boss calls, or I have to answer my call within. It goes back to something that I remember from the 1990s, which is we answer our phone within 5 rings. And I just remember working in an office like that. This was before we had direct lines, where as soon as the phone started ringing, everyone's attention just left, because we start counting the rings. Is someone going to answer it? And then you've just completely distracted the whole workforce. And I was thinking, why on earth would you introduce such a silly, mechanism? Because you're onto a hiding to nothing, because if you don't answer it on 5 and you answer it on 6, it's still good. And yet now the customer's let down.
I remember one of my first clients with Think Productive was this big marketing agency in London, very close to London Bridge Station, like big fancy swanky offices, open plan, 120 people on this floor. And we're sat in the corner, and I'm having a conversation with someone quite senior there, and I'm saying, what's missing? And she was saying to me, what's missing is we don't have the headspace to just really ideate and come up with really strong creative ideas, and we're just kind of lacking how to do that and how to support people do that. And whilst we're having this conversation, the phone rang. And the phone rang on every single desk in this 120 person open plan office simultaneously. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, we're a marketing agency. Our philosophy is the client is king, the client, the client, the client, the client. And so every time a client picked up the phone to call them, it was like, quick, get on it, And so it would come up on the screen, like flashing who they were trying to reach. But the idea was that everybody else, should be their backup if they've gone to the toilet or whatever, like someone else is there to have the phone. And I said, well, like when you look at research, one interruption takes you 15 minutes to recover from. So you're setting your people up to fail by having this system. And, over time, we actually did quite a big project with them around the etiquette of their email and the etiquette of communication. And it really started to make some change. But that's often the starting point. And I think the same metaphor holds for how people use Slack, how people think about, even just regular email as well. Just this sense of it's an instant medium. If I send something, I need a response straight away. And I just think we have to have a really different conversation organizationally around how, managers' job is to get out of the way and to allow people to manage their own attention, and particularly to manage. So what I talk about in the book is the idea of proactive attention. So 2 to 3 hours a day, you have your best energy, your best attention. Those are the hours that you've really got to work on and screen out distractions and do your best work in that time. The rest of the day is kind of fine. Like if you use that 2 to 3 hours really well. But I just think so many organizations are not having that conversation about, when are you at your best? When do you have your best energy? How can we get out of the way? How can we support you? How can we give you space? And so I think that happens digitally, even when it doesn't happen physically.
Well, it does, and you've actually mentioned it in, because you talk about like time. I've heard you talk about like time management is dead. What we should be looking at is attention management, and that is a whole different ballgame. Time management is actually generally quite easy. Learn to use a calendar, and you're going to be pretty good at time managing your time. But
also, it doesn't matter to the work if you're 5 minutes late, right? It matters in other ways.
Yeah, it really doesn't
but actually, you don't have to be on time to be productive. Actually,
yeah. I mean, one of the things I do for myself, and I do try and get my clients to do this, is to coach yourself and teach yourself to not be distracted by that email coming in. So I had one last night where I've been waiting for about 2 weeks for a reply to an email. I wouldn't say it's urgent, but it was exciting because it was a yes or a no, and I'm waiting. I was thinking, please say yes, please say yes. And I saw the email come in, and I was in the middle of doing something that needed focus. And I thought, my initial reaction was open it. And I said, no, this is a training opportunity. Finish what you're doing first and then open it. And, I am so glad I did that, because it was a yes, which was a good anyway. But it was also, I thought, whoa, this is a training opportunity. Don't look at it. Finish this bit of work first, probably another 10, 15 minutes, and then open it. And, the guy who sent me the email isn't expecting a reply within 2 or 3 minutes. And because if anyone does on email, I'm thinking, no, you've got it the wrong way around. If you want me to reply immediately, call me. But then I don't usually answer my phone anyway. But because I like to see who it is first. And if I don't recognize the number, I don't usually answer it.
We were talking about this the other day. We were saying, I was just around a table for dinner with a few friends, and we were having this conversation. Who out of the people around this table actually just proactively, even your friends, like who do you call without scheduling the call first? So the person I sat next to around the table, we'd had a sort of hour-long catch-up phone call, just kind of social phone call a couple of weeks before, but we'd scheduled it, and it was like, oh, let's, I'll put my son to bed, and then it'll be 7:30, and then 7:45 I'll give you a call. And so I'm just in this habit of scheduling. But it was really interesting how there were so few people around the table that would ever just pick up the phone. It's almost become like a rude thing now to interrupt someone's attention, and people feel scared to do it, right?
I hate it now. I tend to, as I say, all my calls are scheduled anyway. But if you've got instant messaging, so that if you want somebody to reply urgently, use the instant messaging system. Although even then, I don't usually see it because those notifications are turned off. But it's kind of training opportunity. Don't look at it immediately. And it's a bit like, I don't know if you've heard that, like self-discipline is like a muscle. You need to keep training it. And that's where, Admiral McRaven's famous Texas University commencement address, where he says, if you want to change the world, begin by making your bed. And the principle behind that is that making your bed every morning before you get out of your bedroom is training your self-discipline. And it's also, you've got the first task of the day done. In the first 2 minutes of the day, you've done the first task. It starts the momentum. And so I when I remember seeing that about 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, oh, that's it. It's a training opportunity. Everything that comes at me where that instant, I want to be distracted. No, it's a training opportunity. Stay focused on the job in hand. And it's a trigger now for me. It's just, I use that one as a training opportunity. But so how would you say, or what would you give a few tips as to how somebody could get better at managing their attention?
Yeah, so what I was going to say just about that training opportunity is, so the Baumeister approach to that would be to say two things which seem contradictory, but they're both really important for managing attention. So one is that so he calls it strength control. Your strength control is a depleting resource as you go through the day. which is why if you go into the store to try and buy toothpaste at the start of the day, you just pick up the toothpaste. And if you go at the end, you're just like, there's 50 choices. Like what, So as we go through the day, we have less and less of that, that willpower, basically, that what Baumeister calls strength control. But also strength controls a muscle. So what you want is to make sure you do have a few opportunities to increase that willpower, a few of those training opportunities that you talk about. But also you want as few of them, or just not enough of them, so that you're able to just really focus on the stuff that matters too. So it's like a fine line, high wire act through the middle of that. But in terms of then what that means for managing attention, so the thing I do around that is I know that my own brain is very instinctive, very distractible, and very likely to just be pulled away in 100 different directions. So my phone basically blocks all that stuff. So I use an app called Freedom, and Freedom, you can set it for don't let me look at these websites through certain times. So for me, it's like the BBC Sport website, like all these different things that are just going to take up time. So you can block those specific sites at specific times. You can also block apps. So I really don't enjoy being on Instagram, but when I am on there, all the notifications are turned off. And then there's only very short windows in the afternoon of days, because the morning time is when I have my better attention, when I'm actually able to get on Instagram. So it really kind of limits the ability of those things to provide you with too many training opportunities. You want to kind of have that as limited as possible. So what I love about that is you're just making one really sort of strict decision with yourself once, and then it's set up. And you can even set the Freedom app up so that it won't even let you exit the app. So there's actually no way of turning it off. And I find that very childish approach really works for me. So thinking about just in general, screening distractions, removing notifications, what do you want to pass your eyeballs every day? I think is a really profound question, because I think the things that you put your attention on ultimately define who you are and what you do. The other thing is just to get really savvy with your own levels of attention and where they come. So for most people, your proactive attention, that 2 to 3 hours in the day where you're going to be most alert, most able to do great work, statistically tends to be in the morning, but not everybody. So you might be someone who's an afternoon, evening person. Then you have, after those 2 to 3 hours of your best proactive, brilliant attention, you have a sort of bit in the middle. And then you have some hours in your day where you have what I call inactive attention. And for that, I have a list on my Todoist app. I have a list called Mindless, which is basically I'm half asleep. I've got really nothing left in the tank, but I can just kill these 5 or 6 things, and it's stuff like doing research online, or like buying stuff, or like just those simple things, or just getting back to scheduling emails or whatever, like just stuff that's quite simple and easy to do. So on the one hand, be really strict with those 2 to 3 hours of proactive attention and make sure you're defending those, really utilizing them well, not being lazy in that time, like doing really great work in that time, like push yourself in those 2 to 3 hours, be the sergeant major of your own brain. And then on the other hand, when it's those hours where you don't have great energy, great attention, give yourself the gift of a mindless list where you can just be like, this is all I need to do now. Like I've done my great work. This is just the other sort of admin, maintenance, whatever else it is, that I'm fine to only be doing this, and that's okay. And so at that point, you want to be your own counselor, or be much softer and kinder to yourself. So just kind of recognizing those dynamics and sort of segmenting the day in that kind of way, segmenting your to-do list in that way, I just think is, it's such a game changer for so many people. And one of those things that, that's the feedback I get from when people have read the book and started to implement that. It's just what a light bulb that is,
Yeah. You mentioned about be your own sergeant major. You just reminded me of, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but the actor Windsor Davies in a comedy show on the BBC, I think it was, called It Ain't Half Hot Mum. So it's set in the jungle during the war.
I mean, I know I look really old, right?
No, well, you want to look at Windsor Davies, It Ain't Half Hot Mum, because he was a sergeant major, and he was sergeant major of a entertainment group in the war, and I think they were based in Singapore or India or somewhere like that. It was in a very hot climate anyway, and he'd be walking around as they were on parade behind them with his wonderful deep Welsh tones going, "I'm watching you, little boy." And it was just and you just remind me, I thought, yeah, it's like you've got that little voice saying, "No, you're not going to be distracted, don't you dare." But it's like just those little, encouraging yourself, just don't allow myself to be distracted. And actually that links me to something that I saw in your book, which is your stealth and camouflage, or tactical hiding, as you called it. I just thought, oh, that's brilliant. Because, I think sometimes part of the problem most people have is we are just too available. And particularly as you go up in the organization, as you get more responsibility, you're higher up in the hierarchy, if you like, you can afford to be less available. And because you kind of like, you don't want to be available to everybody, because then you're still kind of micromanaging or doing your old job. It's like a salesman who goes, or salesperson who becomes a sales manager, if they continue selling, they say, I've got to keep my clients. They're not letting go, and they're not spending any time managing. But as a manager, you have to become more stealthy, more camouflaged, and let your salespeople do the work.
Yeah, for sure. And it sort of comes back to what I was saying before about we've got to have different conversations within organizations about what's important. And one of the most underrated parts of work is quality thinking. And so Henry Ford has a lovely quote, which is, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason so few engage in it.
Yes.
And I think that is more true now than it's ever been. I think the higher up you go in organizations, the more the way you add value actually comes from creative ideas, from figuring out solutions to problems, all of that creative thinking work. And where do people have their best ideas? It's not at their desk. It's not while they're doing email. It's walking the dog or in the shower. You don't actually need time to have great ideas. What you need is headspace.
Yeah.
And so we need to work with organizations to create that headspace. And for that to be seen as something that's really positive and valuable, that people have space, and not something that people should feel guilty about or unproductive about. Like, I just think there's this massive misnomer that thinking time is a luxury, thinking time is non-productive time, and thinking time is somehow invalid. And actually it's the opposite, right? So I just think that's I've been kind of fighting that battle in a lot of organizations for years, and it doesn't actually seem to be getting much better. But it feels like such an important thing. And so particularly when you're in a senior role, you want to be creating that space. You want to be unapologetically saying this is 3 or 4 hours, actually, because for me it's like an hour or two is not enough to get into positive headspace, to really let the ideas flow, and to kind of almost get out of the day-to-day, so that it's more like the subconscious part of the brain takes over. It's no surprise to me that when I'm writing books, the best bits of books and the best ideas for structures come when I'm doing a long run. Like when I'm running for an hour, it's the hour to an hour and a half period where it's like, and it's popping, and I'm on WhatsApp voice, and it's like I'm getting incredible stuff done, and that doesn't happen in 15 minutes or even an hour. It feels to me like the more senior you are in an organization, the more you need to unapologetically create space, because the space is where you really add value. But it feels so esoteric that people just feel guilty about it, or they just feel like everyone else won't understand it, or it's not okay to do it. And so it feels to me like there's a huge conversation to keep having around quality thinking, and that really being about how we make space for what matters.
I think that's because a lot of people or managers, like, they want to see something tangible. They don't see thinking as anyone can show for it, and potentially it could be abused. Sorry, boss, I'm late today because I was thinking in the park. How can you prove they weren't thinking, and so on. And so I think there's obviously a lot of nervousness around allowing their employees the freedom. But I was kind of hoping that the pandemic had, because I remember before the pandemic and the lockdowns of various places, where companies say, our kind of business, we can't do working from home. Well, 2 years in lockdown, they discovered that they actually could work from home. But I was hoping that would actually start a kind of a revolution in the way that we work, because the technology's there. And I remember hearing somebody, and I've gone and forgotten his name now, brilliant marketer, done lots of TED Talks, but he was mentioning that the next big thing in business is going to be video conferencing. And he said this like 5 years ago. So way before the pandemic was coming. And I thought, you know what? He's probably right. I mean, we have all this technology. There's a camera on every device we carry around with us today. Why are we still having to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, spend 2 hours on a train just to go to a meeting with, 5 or 6 other people that discusses the same kind of subject every week? Is that really the best use of your workers' time? But so maybe it will happen. Maybe, as it looks like, we're probably going to end up in a hybrid world on things like that. But yeah, it's interesting to see where that will go. Now, one of the other things that I saw in your book was, be weapons savvy, because I saw the title, I think, weapons, we're talking weapons.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, whoa. And then I thought, okay, of course it makes sense. It's the tools that you're using. Now, I've always used the analogy of like a craftsperson having a toolbox or a tool bag. So I think of like my calendar, my task manager, and my notes app is the tools that I use to do my work each day. There are other tools that I use for writing and obviously recording videos and stuff. But the main tools I'm using each day that's kind of driving my days, my task manager is telling me, these are the things that you've decided need to be done today. Your calendar says you've got enough time to do it. And my notes app with all the ideas. So it all connects together. It's a bit like, this is my favorite hammer in my in my tool bag. But then I saw, weapons savvy. I really like that because it does, when you have a set of tools or weapons that you're using and you see them in that light, that kind of light, rather than saying, oh, it's another task manager. I've kind of, I know you mentioned before that you're using Todoist. I'm also a Todoist user, and that's my, I see it as my friend in a way, because it stops me from forgetting things. I say, I'll do that. And, I've developed now the habit of saying, yes, I will do that. Okay. It means get it into the system. Don't forget, don't trust the head. So I saw that one is, the weapons savvy. I just thought, oh, that's a really good way of.
And the savviness for me is like twofold. So one, it's the biggest improvement opportunities for most people is to find something that you use regularly and just get 5% better at using it. The real classic one is Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Word, and just that stuff that is just ubiquitous because it's on your desk, because that's what your company uses. Microsoft in particular, I think, they're very good. People love Microsoft or hate Microsoft, but I think Microsoft are very good at making software that is immediately usable without training, but also is hugely complex if you get some more training. So like actually some of the stuff that you can do even with Outlook is phenomenal once you really learn it, And so the savviness of seeing those improvement opportunities, but also there's a savviness in sticking with the things rather than being distracted by the newest, shiniest, latest thing. So I think people often live on this promise that I've got productivity nailed down to about 90%, and this app is the 100% bridge to the promised land. And I just think that is just wrong, So generally what people end up doing is spending 2 days, copying and pasting all the stuff that was in one app into another, or reconfiguring stuff. So, savviness is also about saying, use the tools to aid your work. Don't get distracted by the tools. So when I'm using a tool, I don't want to think about the tool really. I don't want to think about it too much. I want to just be engaged in the work. So, changing when there's something that will, genuinely push you a lot further, but actually sticking with stuff and being open to learning and changing and stuff within the tool, I think is better. The kind of ninja analogy that the characteristics that I think is sort of most resonating for me, and I think it's the same when I go out and do talks, is the last one, which is human, not superhero. So what is a ninja? A ninja is a human being with good tools and good skills and some zen and some mindfulness and agility and all these positive traits, but there's no like secret special powers. There's no shortcuts. And so I think that's a really important one, is to recognize that when it comes to productivity, we all have our limits. We all have a certain limitation in the day. We all have certain limitations in terms of our abilities. And also when we're working in a team, we need to look out for people, around us in terms of when someone might be hitting a wall or getting exhausted or struggling or, hiding something that, they're just having their own internal battles over. So I think that's a really important one, is to recognize that there is no special powers. Like, we're not superheroes. There's no way of just, creating magic, even though when you do all that stuff really well, you probably walk through the office and everyone else thinks you're a superhero, right? So that's why I feel like a ninja is a really special thing, because it's like there's all this work that goes into making you look like you have a superpower, and you don't have a superpower, but like you've just done all that work. That's how you got there.
I know, it reminds me, I mean, I've been using Evernote for 13, maybe 2009. So yeah, September 2009. So 13 years anyway. And I remember when Notion came out, and it was tempting. It was so tempting because it looks absolutely, you can create so much beautiful pages and stuff. And I just thought, I haven't got the time to learn that. And yet I saw all my favorite YouTubers. It wasn't long before they were doing videos on Notion and saying, oh, this is a game changer. Well, it turns out that it wasn't actually a game changer. It's very good, but it's not a game changer. Same with Obsidian and Rome Research. They're great apps. I'm certainly not taking it, but they're not game changers. They're just simply a place to put your ideas and your notes. And to me, the only thing you need is a good search tool, because that'll search keywords. Because I'll throw in ideas about, I could throw in something about dog productivity and how dogs are so productive and getting what they want. I have a dog. He is brilliant at that. I want to be able to just type in dog productivity, and all my ideas that I've had or observed my own dog will come, all the notes will come up, and I can just, oh yeah, now I can write a blog post about it or something. I don't need anything to look beautiful. I just need it to work. That's kind of my philosophy. And Todoist, I think, has been
I feel like Notion is a really... I feel like Notion's a really interesting one in that it is a game changer if you're one of the power users. But I think the power users are generally the people who make videos on YouTube about how great Notion is, right? Like, I don't know that actually that many other people are so deep into it that it's changed the game for them. But it feels like one of those ones where actually the barrier to entry to becoming a power user is quite high. Like, there's a lot of, like I've used it and I have an account and I manage a lot of my podcast stuff through it. But I know that I'm really at the early end of what's possible with that app. But like, I also I don't care enough to spend enough time like in there to become a power user. Like, I don't need to. So why would I? So it just feels like a really interesting one. It's almost like the opposite to Microsoft, right? Where like Microsoft, it's really easy on day one to just know how to do email without thinking about it. But yeah, you have to lift the lid and lift the bonnet up and see what's underneath,
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite TV shows is Repair Shop on BBC. I just love that. I just love watching craftspeople do their work. I think that's where the fascination comes. But what I'm looking at the tools they're using, and there isn't a single brand new screwdriver or hammer in their bag. We're looking like, I mean, one of the guys, I think he said, I've had this hammer for 35 years. I absolutely love the feel of it. And I thought, yeah, that's the same with me and Todoist and Evernote. I mean, it might not be the best tools on the market today, but I just love the way they work, and I don't want to change that.
There must be a hammer with a better UI, though.
Yeah, yeah. But when you think about it, it's really about being weapon savvy. It's about really understanding. It's not about the new tools. It's about really learning the tools that you have so that you are a master of those tools, particularly the key ones. The ones that you don't use every day, perhaps not. But like, you're writing books, I write. Well, I'm written a book and several books, and I write blog posts every week. So I use an application called Ulysses. I think I've used Ulysses about 6 years. I know how it works. I know how I've got everything organized, and I just pick it up, dark mode, dark screen, and just write. And I just love that writing experience. And I wouldn't dream of using anything else now. So yeah, it's just learning those tools, I think, is really important. That's why I like the way that weapon. I love the way of saying these are my weapons to get my work done. But being savvy about it, picking the right tools that fit for you. Yeah. Now, another chapter that really caught my attention in your book is the one on agility, being agile, because it just reminded me of something that I've written about in the past, which is like, it's like being a firefighter and a fire prevention officer. I remember an old sales manager from way back in the 90s told me that, great salespeople are preventing fires. They're fire prevention officers. Poor salespeople are fighting fires because they haven't dealt with their customers properly. So they've got problems coming at them. They're trying to sell. They've got, everything's just chaos. But when I was, I was listening to you, because I actually listened to you talking about the agile bit, the agility bit, I was thinking, yeah, it just reminded me of, having well, to me, it's like having a set of personal rules for dealing with certain common situations. But how do you see that people can become a little bit more agile in dealing with the problems that they inevitably are going to face?
Yeah, well, I think a big part of that is, so like, it's like how quickly you see the tornado on the horizon, right? So for me, that's about, if you're just focused on going faster and faster on the hamster wheel, and answering emails and being in meetings, and you're not creating that time and space for quality thinking, then you're not going to scan the horizons and see the potential problems that are there. So for me, that's about, like investing some of your time in personal development, like what's going on in your industry, like what else is going on in the space, that kind of thing. Like scanning the horizons around your organization, who's doing what, and like what are they talking about, and what's the sort of emerging agendas and things like that. And just recognizing that, that's an important part of the inputs that you need to do quality thinking, is the context and what's going on in other parts of the world, So then you've got to then assimilate that and apply that to your own work. And so for me, the big habit is, so we talked about David Allen before, the weekly review. And so I've done that since I read Getting Things Done. And, that's a key part of my method as well, is like not just weekly review, but also daily review. But having those times to really, just kind of come back and say, right, where am I right now? Be in the present moment with your thinking, scan through all the stuff that's on your list and your calendar and everything else, but also just take a step back with that and scan the wider world at the same time. So I have in my review checklist, just a few questions, really, just so it's like, how am I feeling? One of the questions is, what are the sort of problems that I can anticipate within the business? What's going on in the wider world? So just kind of asking myself those questions, just allows me to, even often to start subconsciously. This sounds weird, but I feel like by asking myself those questions, I subconsciously start thinking about that stuff. And then about a week later, it kind of hits me. It's like, oh, okay, cool. There's something there. So, but it feels like you kind of have to feed the brain a little bit with that. You need to, proactively, walk around your building if you're an organization, or attend some of those other seminars, or read some new books, or listen to podcasts or whatever, but just to get some input that's not you and your work, but might be connected to and have context to. And actually, a lot of the best creative ideas come from putting two, seemingly disconnected things together. So much creativity is from that. So for me, that's like making sure that there's time to invest in that during the week. And I think, what is agility ultimately? It's like when some kind of emergency hits and you need to drop everything, you need to drop everything confidently. You need to drop everything to go, because there will be emergencies. When that emergency comes,
of course,
I want to be able to drop everything I'm doing and say, I can be 100% focused on this, and I'm not worried about anything else. And that's not free. You have to really invest in, having a really good second brain, as I talk about in the book, having things, set up in a certain way so that it's really obvious and easy for you to see at any moment, like this is the stuff I'm dropping. And so it's really easy when your boss comes to you and says, hey, work on this. You can say, great, but also these 5 things, what do we do about that? And so you can have much more objective, informed conversations by having that. And so, people often say to me at the sort of end of the year or start of the year, what I want to do this year is to be much more proactive and much less reactive. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. So what are you going to do about that? Because you can't just say that. You can't just say, I've now decided I'm going to be much more proactive and much less reactive. And it's like, that doesn't come for free. You have to do some work in terms of your own systems. And that's almost like the weird paradox of productivity, I think, is that so one of my other characteristics of the ninja is preparedness. When you're prepared, when you're organized, when you're structured, you have freedom. And when you're disorganized, you don't have freedom. And so for me, it's like investing in that stuff and putting the structures in place first, then allows you to make a much wider, much more free set of choices around being agile and reacting to things, and smelling where the action is, like going where the money is, or going where the excitement is, or whatever you want to do. That's just much easier when you when you have a much greater sense of like what your commitments are, what's on your plate, who you are, and all those kind of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, like you, I couldn't, I don't, well, I'm sure I could exist if I didn't do a weekly planning session, but I don't like to try it because, but I think part of the problem for most people is, particularly those actually I found who've come from the GTD background, the getting things done book background, they seem to think that a proper weekly review is going to take you 2 to 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon. Well, the thing is, it's not going to take you 2 to 3 hours unless you want to make it 2 to 3 hours. Like most people's
Or if you haven't done one for a
projects,
month, then it takes you 3
that will
hours.
take a long time. Yeah, but most people's projects they're not all active. And I know certainly I've got several projects that are theoretically on the go right now, but some of them are not due until the end of the second quarter, or even not until the third quarter. So I'm not reviewing those on a weekly basis. I might start nearer the time. I'm reviewing just the projects I'm working on right now, because they are the ones that are, active. They are the ones that things are happening. They're dynamic. But the ones that are basically stalled because I've chosen to stall them, I'm not going to be reviewing them every week. So for me, a weekly planning session, probably 30 minutes, but it does exactly what you just described. It gives me a good 20 minutes to go through all my lists to make sure everything's current. And then that 10 minutes to step back and thinking, am I still going in the right direction? Which is my favorite question.
Yeah.
And then if I ever answer it, which direction do you want to go in? I know I've got a problem. So it's like,
see, am I
going in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure. I would say I agree with all that, but also I would say that I do review all of those projects that I know I'm committed to, even the ones that are further down the track. But really what I mean by reviewing them is I go through the little thing in Todoist where all the projects are, and I just go, yeah, that's still going to happen. Yeah, cool. And so it doesn't take me very long, like a couple of seconds for each one. But that feels a really important step for me because coming back to that thing about creativity, I just have a terrible memory. So it's a really important thing for me to just know, okay, that's what's coming up on my horizon. And then that just allows me, as I'm going through the rest of the week, to just maybe spot opportunities where, oh, there's something that will help that project. Whereas I think if I wasn't looking at that stuff every week, I would just forget it. And so if that feels like a really important thing to just, for me to be able to trust that my second brain is the right stuff and that I've got the right things in there.
Yeah, excellent. Right, we're coming to the end now, but before we do, I have what's becoming the traditional life hack last question. We believe that life is nothing without the time to live it. What is the one thing that you will regret if you're not investing enough time in, and why?
Oh, wow. I'm a big fan of, there's a book, I think her name's Bronnie Ware, and it's like, I think the book's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, or the Top 5 Regrets of the Dying or something. And the one in there that really, and I never remember the wording of it, but one of them is basically like saying the things that you really want to say to your loved ones while you can. And so I think that would be my answer is, whether that's my son, whether that's my parents, like whoever that is to just make sure that I'm being honest with those people and I'm connecting as emotionally as I can with those people. And that can be difficult, especially like with my parents. Think about my parents. They're not emotional people, right? So I feel like I'm the one doing a lot of the work in that. But I just think there's something really important about, my dad's hero died last week. So my dad's hero was David Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash. Yes. I cried. Like it really hit me hard that my dad's hero was gone. And so I have this weekly Sunday email called Rev Up for the Week. And the idea is it's a positive or productive email for the week ahead. And I wrote this really heartfelt thing about heroes and about mortality and obviously I had to put in some, I felt obligated to put in some productivity lessons from Crosby, Stills and Nash, which is a really good example of the creativity thing, right? Productivity, Crosby, Stills and Nash, put it together and you get new stuff. And I was really proud of it. And then I thought for about a day and I thought, I have to send this to my dad. And I know he's going to find it deeply uncomfortable. So I sent it to him and he sent me back a really nice but short thing that just said, thank you for sharing that with me. That was kind of all he said. And then my mum sent me a text, which said something along the lines of, your dad's really overwhelmed by that. And, thank you. And so that's often where that comes out. It's like Chinese whispers through my mum sort of thing. But so I think, it's a very long way of answering your question, but I think
I know how you feel.
We need more authenticity in the world. Yeah.
if
We need
anything
more
like that
authenticity.
happened with my father, the exact same scenario would happen. I get a very short text
Yeah.
from my father,
Yeah.
but my mother would fill me in on the real side.
Yeah.
Absolutely the
Yeah.
same.
But
Yeah.
it struck me how affected I was though by, I mean, I'm a big fan of Crosby, Stills and Nash as well, but through my dad. But my dad would follow them around on tour, like it was his hero dying, and it really kind of stopped me in my tracks to just think about, obviously, his mortality, my mortality, how temporary everything is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing when it comes to work, is like we can get so caught up in our work, we're so invested in our work, it gets tangled up with our own identity, all this stuff. And I suppose the lesson in all that is it's all temporary.
Yes,
none of this is going to be here in 100 years. And so I think sometimes I say that to clients as well, when people are having a rough day. So if you're watching this or listening to this because you're procrastinating from doing some work and feeling like you want a productivity dose and you're stressed, like what I often say to clients is like, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. If you zoom out from you're just someone sitting in a room typing. And if you zoom out from that, you see your office or your house. And if you zoom out from that, you see your town. And it doesn't take long before you zoom out and what you see is just like dust floating around in space. And for me, that's intensely comforting, because it just means that whatever you're stressed about doesn't really matter that much.
Well, it reminds me of the thing is that whatever you're worried about today, he's just going to be laughing at in 5 years' time, or even in a year's time. So it's not worth getting stressed and worried about. Just deal with it. Whatever it is, figure out a solution. I think it was, I've forgotten. It's CIA, isn't it? I've kind of forgotten what that actually means, but it's the last one I know. A is accept.
So it's control. What can you control?
Influence, and accept.
What can you influence, and what you just have to accept.
Yeah. So if you can't do anything with it, just accept it and just move on. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today here, Graham. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. If you'd like to learn more about time and life planning, then here at LifeHack, we have the perfect program. Our life planning program will teach you many of the aspects we have discussed today and a lot more. Full details of the program are in the show notes below. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode.